Thousands of desperate refugees begged Secretary of State James Baker for help.
It's nothing less than a crime against humanity.
Just 2 weeks ago, they fled their towns and villages fearing for their lives. Today, as many as 2 million Kurdish refugees are starving at the border. The human catastrophe. Tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel, reporting from Washington with the latest in the Persian Gulf, Sam Donaldson.
There's a great debate underway in Washington over the president's policy of non-intervention in Iraq. Shameful, columnist Mary McGrory writes in the Washington Post. Absolutely correct, columnist George Will says on ABC. But beyond the debate on policy lies the consequences of policy. And while time may prove the president correct, the most immediate and visible consequence of non-intervention is the suffering and death of thousands of Kurds who, having fled from Saddam Hussein's army, are now dying in the mountains of Turkey and Iran from exposure, starvation, and disease. The United States and other nations have belatedly swung into action with an airlift of supplies, but for many of the displaced Kurds, it will be too late. David Marish brings us up to date on what's happening to the Kurds.
In Iraq, all roads lead in one direction, out. Across the border in Turkey, a refugee camp in what one reporter called the Valley of the Damned, a temporary haven for Iraqi Kurds who've saved little but their lives.
We were living just on what we had before, and now we had finished everything. We are just dying.
Into the mountains of Turkish Kurdistan, where the hillsides tremble with humanity, Secretary of State James Baker came today to confront in person horrors even vivid videotape can only suggest.
We are pleading all the nations in the world just to help all these people here.
We are going to mount a very large international effort to do just that.
The Baker visit lasted 12 minutes.
Certainly, Baker could not help but be impressed by what he saw today and indicated that the world is going to have to launch a massive international humanitarian effort to help house and feed the hundreds of thousands who are now stranded on that border. But he also made it clear that the U.S. is not going to change its basic policy of not helping the Kurds inside Iraq.
On the roads of eastern Turkey, help is on the way. But these trucks and the food and blankets they bring have been on the road 4 days. Human need is outrunning them. More help floats down from the skies, but delivery in the rugged mountains is difficult. And once the supplies are recollected, distributing them becomes a painful, sometimes brutal process.
Not food. For 3 days I'm not eating. No bread, no water, no anything myself.
I know that yesterday 10 men and 1 woman died here, and 2 children.
People yesterday were weeping with exhaustion after they were forced to walk 10 miles back up the mountain to a higher place in the hills. Every time we go up into those hills, we find new graves. There are old people who are dying, simply, completely, totally worn out.
These camps are an improvised solution to an unforeseen problem. But in the Middle East, temporary refugee shelters have become permanent political and social disasters.
If we look at the Middle East, we see camps established in 1948, which are still producing refugees, where the people involved are no longer the citizens of any country. A source of political manipulation, a source of terrorism.
America and its coalition allies held off the destruction of Saddam Hussein's army to preserve the political integrity of Iraq. But now, with Saddam smashing his own country into human pieces, the allies have been left scrambling to preserve those Kurdish and Shiite survivors in the hope that Iraq can one day be put back together. I'm Dave Marish for Nightline in Washington.
Within the last hour, we were fortunate to reach Lionel Rosenblatt by phone from the Turkish town where Secretary Baker toured a Kurdish refugee camp earlier today. Mr. Rosenblatt is the president and executive director of Refugees International. Mr. Rosenblatt, tell us more of what it's like there. What do you see?
Well, the refugees, Sam, are strewn over 3 steep hillsides on the trek in from Iraq. They're arriving steadily, both on foot and occasionally with donkeys alongside. The only distribution of any aid that these people have had are some biscuits and bread provided by the local Turkish villagers. There has been no other relief supply reaching the camp at the moment, although there is a convoy in storage now below here in the village, and we're going to try to get that up to the refugees tomorrow morning.
What was the refugees' attitude toward Secretary Baker? I understand he was there about 12 minutes.
He was there a short time, but I think enough to be overcome by the scene. Anybody would be, of people as far as you could see, without tents, without shelter, mostly just on blankets or scraping the bare earth flat with their pots and knives as their only utensils. He was received with a clapping that resounded through the valley.
What is the attitude of these refugees toward the United States?
The attitude is at this stage one more of sorrow than anger. They can't understand how the tables have been turned on them so swiftly. They can't understand, above all, why there is no international assistance.
Now, you've walked down among these people, and you surely must have found some particular stories that struck your attention.
We came across an old couple by a fire. They were lucky enough to have a fire. One of them was blind, and the wife was poking at the fire, trying to keep it going. Not too far from there was a widow with 5 kids. They had no fire, no wood. They had one blanket for all of them. Then I guess maybe the most poignant of all, the one that sticks in my mind, is a child crying with diarrhea out in the rain. And this symbolizes what's going to happen to this camp, with raw sewage running down in the rain. There's no anti-diarrheal medication here. We don't understand why there is no medical presence from the Red Cross, nor any official from the UN to begin to try to put some order into this.
Mr. Rosenblatt, Turkish authorities, the United States, other nations now say they are mobilizing and they are moving. Do they have any time? How much time is there to save these people?
2 or 3 days before there is massive death here from pneumonia, diarrhea, and they're already talking about the possibility of epidemic diseases because of the lack of any sort of sewage and sanitation. There's no water source except what's available locally. You can imagine what that's become.
Thank you, Lionel Rosenblatt. When we come back, correspondent Forrest Sawyer will look at the refugee problem on the Iranian border, where the numbers of Kurds may exceed 1 million. And later in our broadcast, we'll be joined by a leading Kurdish American who represents the be found. He filed this report.
For 5 days now, Iraqi refugees have been streaming past this Iranian border point. More than 600,000 already, officials say, with no end in sight. Mostly Kurds, but also Turks and Arabs, rushing from the towns of northern Iraq Saddam has turned into killing fields. They have walked for days to reach Iran with only what they can carry on their backs.
There is no food, no water, no anything. There is nothing for live there.
The Iranians here have been stunned by the refugees' arrival. They expected only a few thousand, so the Iraqis are staying wherever they can. Here, 50 families have gathered in a house bombed out during the Iran-Iraq war. A similar house collapsed 2 days ago and killed 5 people.
You must help us. We need help now. You see these people, they are very poor. They walking 4 days in the legs. They are very, very tired. I hope you help us.
It's now late afternoon here in the village of Nosud. We've been here all day long, and people have been streaming past this point continuously. Many of them have begun to set up camp now. The great problem, of course, is that most of them have no food. Nothing at all. For these 5 days, there has been almost no outside help. The only thing between these people and disaster has been a single poor mountain village called Pawa. These few villagers, religious leaders, a school teacher, a government clerk, are directing the massive relief effort. They have sent police cars through the streets to ask for help. And all the people of Pawa, just 20,000 of them, have rushed to try to save 500,000.
All
the people of power help the Kurdish refugees because every housekeeper in every house in power, he is now busy.
The people here have found flour wherever they could, and they've worked night and day in their homes to bake bread. They've cut wood to stoke the fires. that will boil thousands of potatoes. Everything is collected by volunteers, many of them high school students, and rushed to the border, where it is received by desperate hands. As much as the town has helped, it is still never enough.
We have nothing. I suffer from tired, from cold, from angry, from hungry.
The Iranian government is creating temporary camps for these refugees, so the townspeople have focused on the most critical problem. With a convoy of just 200 cars and trucks, they are trying to ferry the refugees to safety away from the border.
They are afraid from regime of Saddam because he followed the people up to the border, and many people killed by the artillery and missiles. So the most important thing now is to bring the people from Iraq to Iran.
There is no room at Paula's small hospital for all the victims, and the people here ask, where is the outside help they so desperately need? The Iranian government has sent nothing to the border yet. The Red Crescent from the nearby town of Bakhtaran has sent tents and a little food. The Red Cross has sent a few hundred tents, heaters, dates, and oranges. It is far from enough.
When the people find an animal in distress, they help. Why do the international organizations keep silent about the Kurdish people?
Early this afternoon, there was an answer. The first Red Cross supply truck pulled into town. People here say they hope they have more supplies very soon. And they say they have a message for the world, a simple one. That help must arrive very quickly. Forrest Sawyer for Nightline in Pawa, Iran.
When we come back, we'll talk with the leading Kurdish American who has met with State Department officials concerning the plight of his people. And we'll go live to Tehran to talk with the head of the refugee organization dealing with all refugees now.